Adaline Reyes. 6 in the morning, and there's a man in her bakehouse who doesn't belong there. Her brother-in-law, Colton, standing by the cooling racks with a clipboard, counting her sheet pans out loud like he's taking inventory of a house after a funeral. 14 half sheets, 9 full. He writes down family inventory and underlines it twice. And Adaline, she doesn't argue. She doesn't even slow down. She reaches past him, pulls the morning trays, and sets her father's rolling pin down on the bench, where it always goes. Colton nudges it aside with the back of his hand like it's trash. 2 weeks later, it gets worse. At the regional co-op showcase, in front of 40-odd buyers and vendors, her mother-in-law Diane stands up straight and announces that the Whitlock family is restructuring Grant's little bakery. Then, she hands the buyer Colton's business card. And when Adaline just stands there, holding a tray of her own bread, Diane looks at her and says it plainly. A wife doesn't own a family's name. Adaline, you were the help. That night I didn't call a lawyer to fight them. I called the Secretary of State, and I asked them to certify a document I'd filed 11 years ago and forgotten I owned. If you've ever been treated as invisible by your own family, this story is for you. Before we go further, if stories about quiet people finding their spine are your kind of thing, subscribe and comment the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this one travels. Now let me take you back to the beginning and show you how a woman built something with her own 2 hands and how the people who married into it decided it should be theirs. The town is Alder Creek, Oregon. Small enough that the diner knows your order and the hardware store knows your dog's name. It sits in the crook of a river valley, all cedar and fog and slow mornings. And on the north end of Main Street, tucked between a shuttered 5 and dime and a barbershop with a striped pole that still turns, there's a bakery called Fern Rye. Adaline Reyes built it from nothing, and I mean nothing. She started in her own kitchen, a second-hand oven that ran 40 degrees hot, so she learned to bake by feel, not by numbers. She'd wake at 4. Long before the sky went gray, she'd tie back her hair, dust the counter, and reach for the one tool that mattered more than any of the fancy equipment she'd buy later: a rolling pin. Burl-wood, heavy in the hand, the grains swirling like water frozen mid-motion. Her father made it, turned it on his own lathe, in his own garage, the winter before he passed. He wasn't a baker, he was a millwright. But he knew his daughter's hands, and he knew what she wanted, and he made her the finest tool he could from a knot of maple burl he'd saved for years. She's rolled 10,000 mornings of dough with that pin. Every batch starts with it. That's not superstition. That's just how she keeps him close. The name came from the land, fern from the creek banks, rye from the flour she milled coarse for her sourdough. She lettered the first sign herself, by hand, and it was crooked, and she loved it anyway. Money was thin those first years. She sold at the Saturday market off a folding table. 6 loaves, then 12. Then people started asking her to hold one back for them, because by 9 in the morning she was always sold out. She remembers the first real order like some people remember a wedding. The Cascade Market Co-op sent a buyer to the market to try the rye. He bought a loaf, tore the heel off right there, chewed it slow, and asked how many she could make in a week. She said 40. She could make maybe 15. She said 40 anyway. Then she went home and figured out how to keep her word. That's who Adaline is. She says 40 and figures it out. She met Grant Whitlock in the bakery's 2nd year. Grant was charming. I'll give him that much. He came from the kind of Alder Creek family that had a pew with their name on it and a table at every Rotary lunch. Whitlock meant something in that town. His grandfather had owned the lumber mill before it closed, and even after the money thinned, the name stayed heavy. Grant had the handshake, the easy laugh, the way of walking into a room like he'd been invited to run it. He fell for the baker with flour on her forearms and burns up to her elbows, and she fell for the man who made the bank loan officer suddenly return her calls. Because that's the truth of it. When Adaline Reyes walked into the credit union alone, she was a woman with a folding table and a dream. When she walked in as a Whitlock, doors opened. She'll tell you now, plainly, that she let that happen. That's her blind spot, and she owns it. For years, she let the family name ride along on the front of the things she made. She let the Rotary crowd assume Grant was the brains, and she was the baker. Because it kept the peace. Because Diane smiled more when the story went that way. And Adaline was so tired, so early every morning, that peace felt like a fair trade. She had the dough. Let them have the credit. What was the harm? The harm was that they came to believe it. Now here's the part almost nobody knew about. Not Diane, not Colton. For a long time, not even Grant. In the very first year, when Fern Rye stopped being a hobby and started being a business, somebody had to make it real on paper. An LLC. Articles of organization filed with the state. It's dull, dull work. And Grant, who by then was already very good at being busy without doing anything, waved it off. Said he couldn't be bothered with the paperwork. Said she should just handle it. So she did. She drove 2 hours to the county seat on a Tuesday, sat in a fluorescent office with a paper number in her hand, filled out the form at a counter with a pen chained to a clipboard. And where it asked for the member, the single owner of the company, she wrote her own name. Not Whitlock. She and Grant weren't even married yet. She wrote the name on the deed to her little rented kitchen, the name on her driver's license, the name her father gave her. Adaline Reyes. Sole member. Sole manager. She paid the fee. Got a stamped copy. Drove home. Put the folder in the bottom drawer of the desk in the back office, under the tax stuff and the equipment warranties. And, this is the part that matters, she forgot about it. Truly, it was just a chore she'd finished, a folder in a drawer. She never once thought of it as a shield. Because back then, nobody was swinging anything at her. Keep that folder in mind. She won't. Not for 11 years, but you should. They married in the bakery's 3rd year. And for a while, it was good enough. Grant would come by, chat up the regulars, drive a delivery when he felt like it. Adaline built. She hired her first real employee, a young woman named Marisol Ibarra, who could smell when a proof was ready from across the room, and who stayed at 4 in the morning without ever once complaining. Marisol became her right hand, her head baker, the one person who saw exactly how the sausage got made and how little of it involved anybody named Whitlock. The wholesale account grew. Cascade Co-op tripled the order. Then a second co-op called. Then a restaurant. Fern Rye moved out of the home kitchen and into a leased commercial space with real ovens and a loading dock. Adaline signed that lease. Her name, her signature, her personal guarantee against the debt if it all went sideways. And the whole time, the Whitlock family told a different story at their Sunday dinners. That Grant had a nice little business, that the family had helped her get on her feet, that she was lucky. Which brings us to the dinners. And the first crack. You have to understand how the Whitlock table worked. Diane ran it. 66 years old, spine like a fence post, opinions like scripture. She served the plates herself, and the order she served them in was a language everybody at that table understood, without a word being spoken. Grant first, then Colton, then Nora, the daughter, then whatever guests mattered. And Adaline was served last. Every single time. 11 years of Sunday dinners, and she got her plate when the gravy had gone lukewarm and the good rolls were gone. She noticed. Of course she noticed. She just decided it didn't cost her anything. One Sunday, maybe 4 years back, Diane made a point of it in front of everyone. Adaline had brought a loaf of her cardamom rye, her signature, the bread that built the co-op account. Diane cut a slice, tasted it, and made a small face. You know, she said, it'd be lovely with a little more sugar. People around here don't want anything too rustic. Then she set it aside and served the store-bought dinner rolls instead. It's a small thing, a slice of bread and a raised eyebrow. But Adaline had spent 2 years perfecting that crumb, and to have it corrected, at that table, by a woman who'd never so much as measured flour, It landed. Then, Diane turned to the guests and called Fern Rye Grant's little project, like the whole thing was a hobby he indulged. And Grant just smiled and reached for another roll. And Adaline got her plate last, and the gravy was cold, and she said thank you. That's offense number 1. Private small, the kind you swallow. She swallowed a lot of them. Then the marriage ended. I'll spare you the long version, because it isn't the point. It just quietly ran out of road. Grant, it turned out, was very good at sliding out of things without a mess. He wanted a clean exit. No fault, no fight, split it fair and move on. He genuinely believed that's what was happening. His blind spot was that he never questioned his mother's version of anything, and his mother had decided that fair meant the family kept the bakery. The separation was maybe 2 months old when offense number 2 walked through the door. It was a Wednesday, mid-morning. Marisol was pulling ciabatta, and Adaline was in the back doing invoices, and Colton Whitlock came in the front like he owned the deed. 38 years old, the family's self-appointed business guy, which mostly meant he'd started 3 things and finished none of them. He had a clipboard too. He always has a clipboard. It makes him feel like a man with a plan. He walked the floor like an appraiser, ran a finger along the mixer, opened the walk-in and let the cold roll out. And when Marisol asked, politely, if she could help him, he said, and she remembers it word for word, because she told Adaline that same day, shaking, he said, I'll be handling operations around here now. Family's reorganizing things. Nothing you need to worry about, sweetheart. Then he saw the rolling pin. Adaline's father's burl-wood pin, resting on the bench where it lives. And Colton picked it up, looked at it like it was a stick somebody left behind, and set it on top of a stack of empty flour sacks by the trash. Clutter. To him. He moved it out of his way and never thought of it again. Marisol moved it back. She didn't know the whole story of that pin. Not then. She just knew it mattered to Addie, so she put it where it belonged. That's offense number 2. One witness. And it's the moment the family stopped whispering and started reaching. Adaline came home from that day and sat in her truck in the driveway for a long time. Not crying, just quiet. Thinking she'd built this from a folding table and a hot oven and burned forearms. And the people who'd never once shown up at 4 in the morning had decided, between themselves, at a table where she was always served last, that it was theirs to divide. And still, she didn't fight. Not yet. She figured Grant would come to his senses. She figured the lawyers would sort the marital assets fairly. She figured being right would be enough. She didn't yet understand what they were planning to do in public. The Cascade Market Co-op runs a vendor showcase every spring. It's the big one. Buyers come from 3 counties. Restaurants, grocers, the co-op purchasing team, food writers from the regional paper. 40, 50 people in a bright rented hall, wandering between tables of cheese and cider and jam and bread, deciding who gets the year's contracts. For a maker like Adaline, it's the room. Her wholesale renewal, the account that was now more than half her revenue, got settled off the strength of days like this. And the man who held that account was Dev Okafor, the co-op's buyer, the same man who'd torn the heel off her rye at the market years ago and asked how many she could make. He liked her bread. He liked her. And their renewal was due. Adaline spent 2 days baking for that showcase. She brought her best. The cardamom rye. A walnut levain that took 3 days to build. Little tastes of everything. Plated careful on boards. Her crooked hand-lettered cards propped beside each one. She got there before dawn, set her table, and for 1 hour that morning she felt like herself. A baker in a room full of people who loved food. Marisol beside her, both of them proud. Then the Whitlocks arrived. Diane came in like a ship under sail. Colton behind her with, you guessed it, a clipboard. Grant trailing, hands in his pockets, wishing he were anywhere else. They didn't come to sell anything. They came to make an announcement. Diane walked the room. Shook hands. Worked toward Dev Okafor's group, like she was closing on a target. And when she reached him, with buyers and vendors close enough to hear, she put on her warmest church voice and said it loud enough to carry. "Dev, I wanted you to hear it from the family directly. The Whitlocks are restructuring Grant's Bakery. Colton here will be taking the reins on the business side going forward. So any contracts, any renewals, you'll want to route those through him now." And she reached into Colton's hand and passed Dev a crisp business card. Colton Whitlock. Whitlock Family Holdings, a company that did not exist. Dev's face did a careful thing. He glanced past Diane to Adaline's table. To Adaline herself, standing there with a bread knife in her hand and 40 people between them. And Adaline. This is the moment. Adaline stepped forward. Not to shout. Just to say, evenly, "Diane, this is my table. Fern Rye is mine." Dev knows that. And that's when the mother-in-law delivered the line that the whole showcase heard. Diane didn't even raise her voice. She smiled, a little sadly, like she was correcting a child. "Oh, honey," a pause. Long enough to land. "A wife doesn't own a family's name. You were the help." You could feel the room cool. Somebody near the cider table stopped mid-sentence. A food writer's pen went still. 40-some people, and every one of them heard a woman told, out loud, that the thing she made with her hands was never hers. And here's what Adaline did. She didn't cry. She didn't argue. She didn't give them the scene they half wanted. She turned back to her table. She finished plating the loaf she'd been slicing, laid each piece down clean, straightened her little card, and she picked up her father's rolling pin and her board, and she walked out of that hall with her chin level and her hands steady. Marisol grabbed the rest and followed her. The whole way to the truck, Marisol was furious, whispering that they should march back in there, that everyone heard it, that it wasn't right. And Adaline just kept walking. She loaded the truck, she shut the tailgate, and she said one thing, quietly, more to herself than to Marisol. "They think it has their name on it." That's offense number 3. Public counted witnesses, the peak of the campaign against her. And it's the last one she takes lying down, though the family has no idea. Because from the outside, she looks like a woman who just lost. For a few days, she almost was. The demand letter came 4 mornings later. Certified mail. The kind you sign for. It came from a firm called Sutcliffe and Vane, and the attorney's name was Bram Sutcliffe, and Adaline knew before she opened it that the family had lawyered up. She signed for it on the loading dock with flour on her hands. Then, she carried it inside and set it on the front counter. And she left it there, unopened, for 2 days. I want you to sit with that, because it tells you exactly where she was. She wasn't being brave. She was bracing. That envelope was the sound of the other shoe, and she wasn't ready to hear how loud it was. When she finally opened it, standing at the counter after close, the numbers made her sit down. The letter valued Fern Rye Bakehouse at $840,000. It described the business as a marital and family asset. It stated that the Whitlock family intended to take operational control. And it gave her 30 days. 30 days to vacate the leased commercial kitchen, the kitchen she'd signed for, personally guaranteed, and to transfer control of the business to the family's representative. There was a schedule, a deadline, the cold machinery of a seizure, dressed up in polite legal paragraphs. $840,000. She'd never once thought of it in a number like that. To her, it was ovens and orders, and Marisol's paycheck, and the smell of levain at 4 a.m. To them, it was a figure to be divided, and they were giving her a month to hand over her own hands. She didn't call anyone that night. She sat in the dark bakehouse with the letter and let it be as bad as it was. And then it got worse, because 2 days after that, the second blow landed, and this one came from the one place she thought was safe. An email from Dev Okafor. He was kind about it. That was almost the worst part. Dev wrote that he'd been made aware of some uncertainty around the ownership and management of Fern Rye, that the co-op valued their long relationship, but that their policy, when there was a question of who actually controlled a vendor, was to pause any renewal until the ownership was clarified in writing. He was sorry. He hoped it would be sorted quickly. But the wholesale contract, the account that was more than half her income, the account that had grown from that torn heel of rye at a folding table, that account was now on hold. Do you see what they'd done? They didn't need to win in court. They didn't need to be right. They just needed to make the buyer nervous. A whisper of doubt at the showcase, a lawyer's letterhead, and suddenly the thing Adaline built was worth nothing to the man who bought it, because he couldn't be sure it was hers to sell. That's the trap of it. That's what the Whitlocks understood, in their bones, without ever reading a single legal document. They believed that a name and enough confidence could take what work had made. And for about a week, standing in her cooling bakehouse with an unopened lease renewal from the co-op and a 30-day eviction from her own family, Adaline Reyes almost believed it too. She almost called it. She told me later, she got as far as making a list of what her ovens might sell for. She sat at the desk in the back office one night with a legal pad, doing the math on surrender, on walking away with whatever cash she could, and letting them choke on a name and an empty building. And it was the desk that saved her, because that legal pad was in the top drawer. And when she pulled the top drawer out too far, tired and not thinking, it stuck on something jammed in the drawer beneath it. She got down on her knees under the desk to work it loose, and her hand found a folder she hadn't touched in 11 years. Soft at the corners, a little water-stained, buried under old tax returns and the warranty for a mixer she'd long since replaced. She almost put it back. It was junk, surely, old paperwork. But she opened it, there on the floor, in the light of the one lamp. Articles of organization. State of Oregon. Stamped and filed. And under member, the single line naming the one person who owned this company, top to bottom, in the eyes of the law, there was one name. Not two. Not Whitlock. One name, in her own careful print from a Tuesday she'd forgotten, at a counter with a chain pen, 2 hours from home. Adaline Reyes, sole member, sole manager. She sat on the floor of that back office for a long time, and something moved across her face that hadn't been there in weeks. Not tears, not rage. Something quieter and far more dangerous to the people who'd underestimated her. She read it 3 times to be sure the years hadn't rewritten it in her memory. They hadn't. Grant's name was nowhere on it. Not as a member. Not as a manager. Not anywhere. Because in year 1, he couldn't be bothered with the paperwork. And in year 1, she'd signed the only name that ever legally mattered. They'd sent lawyers. They'd valued her life's work at $840,000 and given her 30 days to walk away from it. Diane had stood in a room of 40 people and called her the help. And the entire time, the answer had been sitting in a drawer under a broken mixer warranty. A folder none of them knew existed. Because not one of the Whitlocks, not Diane, not Colton, not Grant, not the attorney they'd paid, had ever once pulled the actual state filing to check whose name was on it. They assumed. A wife doesn't own a family's name. They were so sure of it they never looked. She didn't call Grant. She didn't call Diane to gloat. She didn't even call her own lawyer yet. She sat at the desk, set the certified letter from Sutcliffe and Vane on one side and the 11-year-old articles of organization on the other, and she looked at the two of them side by side under the lamp. And then she reached for her phone, and she pulled up a number she never thought she'd dial in her life. The Secretary of State. Business Division. Certified copies. Because a folder in a drawer is one thing, but a document certified by the state, stamped, sealed, official, undeniable, that's a wall. And Adaline Reyes was done building bread for people who wanted to take it. It was time to build one thing more. She placed the call the next morning, the moment the office opened. Ordered certified copies of the articles. And the original operating agreement, too. The one that named the sole member and the sole manager in language no clipboard could argue with. She paid for the rush. She wrote down the tracking number. And she said to a state clerk who had no idea what she was setting in motion, how long until they're official? And then she did the thing that should terrify anyone who ever mistook her silence for weakness. She said nothing to the family. Not a word. She let the 30-day clock keep ticking on the letter she'd already answered in her own mind. She let Colton keep telling people around town that he'd be running things soon. She let Diane keep believing the name had won. Somewhere across town, Bram Sutcliffe was drafting the next step in a seizure of a company his clients did not own, and would learn they'd never owned, in a room, in front of the one buyer they'd come to impress. Adaline hung up the phone. She looked at the tracking number on the notepad. Then she picked up her father's rolling pin from the bench, felt the old weight of it settle into her palm, and turned back to the dough that still needed making. Because the ovens don't care about lawyers. Morning was coming, and there were loaves to pull, and for the first time in weeks, she was smiling. She had 30 days. And she had a name. And what she chose to do with them, the trap she was about to let them walk straight into, in front of the very buyer they thought they'd stolen, is where this really begins. The certified copies came back 2 weeks later. A flat cardboard mailer, corner bent from the truck, sitting in the same spot on the front counter where the demand letter had sat unopened. She didn't tear it open in a rush. She washed the flour off her hands first, dried them on her apron. Then she slit the tape with a paring knife and slid the pages out onto the wood. There it was. Raised seal. State stamp. The kind of ink that doesn't argue. Articles of organization. Fern Rye LLC. Sole member. Sole manager. Adaline Reyes. And under it, the operating agreement she'd forgotten she'd signed, 11 years old. Her signature at the bottom, younger, looping the way she used to loop it before her hands got tired. One name. No Grant. No Whitlock. No clipboard. Just her. Marisol came out from the back, wiping her hands, and saw Addie standing very still. "Is it bad?" she asked. Addie turned the top page around so Marisol could read it. Marisol read it twice. Her mouth opened a little. She looked up. "Addie, I know. They don't know this exists." "No," Addie said. "They don't." And here is where a lot of people would have made their mistake. They'd have picked up the phone. They'd have called Diane. They'd have called Colton and read it to him line by line just to hear him go quiet. They'd have wanted the satisfaction right then, hot, in the moment. Addie put the pages back in the mailer. She slid the mailer into the bottom drawer of the back office desk, under the old tax returns, right where the folder had lived for 11 years. And she said nothing. Because she understood something the Whitlocks never would. A truth you shout in a kitchen is just a fight. A truth you lay on a table in front of the right people, at the right moment, is a wall. So she got herself an attorney. Her own. A quiet woman 2 towns over who read the certified copies, set them down, and said, "There's no case here." There was never a case. You are the company. Her attorney sent one short letter to Bram Sutcliffe stating the facts plainly. Sole member. Sole manager. No marital claim to a business the husband never held an interest in. The Whitlocks ignored it. Of course they did. Diane had decided how the world worked, and no letter was going to move her. That was the whole engine of the thing. That arrogance. Addie was counting on it. She quietly moved the operating account and the lease contact back to member only, just cleaning up her own house. And then Sutcliffe's office called and scheduled what they were calling a transition meeting. At the bakehouse, with Dev Okafor from the co-op present, so the family could reassure the account and hand it over cleanly. Addie said yes. She said yes without a flicker in her voice. She wrote the date on the legal pad in the top drawer, the same pad she'd once started drafting her surrender on. Different words now. Then she went back to the ovens, because morning was still coming, and the loaves still didn't care about lawyers. The first near miss came a week before the meeting. Colton went to the bank. He walked in with that clipboard of his and tried to add himself as a signer on the Fern Rye account. Told the teller he was handling operations for the family now. The teller was polite. She went and got the manager. The manager pulled the account and saw exactly one authorized name on it. He called Addie. "Miss Reyes, we have a Mr. Whitlock here asking to be added as a signer. As the member of record, do you authorize that?" Addie was elbow deep in a rye starter. She held the phone to her ear with her shoulder. "No," she said. "Pleasant, simple, I don't." "Thank you, Ms. Reyes," and that was it. She didn't explain. She didn't gloat. She let Colton stand there at the counter while the manager told him there'd been some kind of mix-up in the system, and it couldn't be done today, and he'd have to take it up with the account holder. Colton assumed it was a glitch. He left irritated, not alarmed. He told Diane the bank's computers were behind. Diane told him not to worry. The lawyers would sort it at the meeting. Marisol heard the whole thing secondhand and nearly bit through her lip, trying not to laugh. "You could have told him right there." "I could have," Addie agreed, scraping starter off her fingers. "Why didn't you?" "Because the meeting has Deb in it," she said. "And I only get to do this once." The second week, Nora came by, Grant's sister. She'd never taken sides out loud, never sat at Diane's right hand the way the others did. She came in the back, past the ovens, and stood there twisting her keys. "I shouldn't be here," Nora said. "You always could be," Addie said. "Coffee?" Nora shook her head. Addie, I need you to know what they're planning." At the meeting, Mom's going to introduce Colton to the co-op buyer as the new owner, like it's already done, in front of him. She thinks if she just says it confidently enough, it becomes true. Nora's voice cracked a little. "It's what she's always done." Addie wiped down the bench. Slow, she looked at Nora, and there was no anger in it, none at all. "Good," she said. Nora blinked. "Good? Let her introduce him as the owner." Addie set the cloth down. "Let her say it in front of everyone." Nora studied her a long moment. Whatever she saw there, it made her let out a breath she'd clearly been holding for weeks. She didn't ask any more. She just nodded, squeezed Addie's flour-dusted arm once, and slipped out the back the way she'd come. The morning of the meeting, Addie was in by 4, same as always. She made 40 loaves. She wasn't going to skip the day's bread for a lawyer. She pulled the last tray at 7, and the whole bakehouse smelled the way it had smelled 10,000 mornings before this one. Yeast and char and warm butter. Her father's rolling pin sat on the bench where it always sat, and before she took her apron off, she picked it up, felt the burl grain worn smooth under her thumb, and set it down gentle. Then Dev Okafor arrived, and everything got very tight very fast. He came in early, before the family, and he looked like a man who'd rather be anywhere else. He found Addie by the counter. "I'm going to be straight with you," Dev said, low, "because you've always been straight with me. This ownership thing has been a mess for weeks. My board doesn't like mess. If it isn't settled today, clean, on paper, no ambiguity, I have to take the renewal to Harrow Street Baking. They've been calling. I don't want to. Your bread is better. But I can't hang the co-op's whole bakery line on a family fight." He looked genuinely pained. "You understand." "I understand," Addie said. "Is it going to be settled today?" She held his eyes. Yes, he didn't know what to do with how calm she was. Nobody in a losing position was ever that calm. He nodded slowly and went to find a chair. The Whitlocks came in like they owned the place, which was the whole point of them. Diane first, chin up, a scarf knotted at her throat like a woman arriving to accept an award. Colton behind her with the clipboard. Of course the clipboard. Grant last, hanging back near the door with his hands in his pockets, not quite meeting anyone's eyes. And Bram Sutcliffe, briefcase, gray suit, a folder of papers he drafted about a company his clients did not own. They sat at the long prep table Addie used for wholesale packing. Dev at one end. Marisol stood back by the ovens, arms crossed, watching. Nora took a chair against the wall. For 1 second, just before it started, Grant did a strange thing. He leaned toward his mother and said, quietly, "Mom, wait. There's something you should know about the paperwork." "Not now, Grant," Diane said, without even turning her head. And Grant closed his mouth. He closed his mouth the way he'd closed it for 11 years. He sat back down. Sutcliffe opened his folder. He was professional about it, cold and smooth, sliding papers across the table toward Addie. "Miss Reyes, these formalize the transfer of operational control of the business to Whitlock Family Holdings, along with the vacancy of the leased premises within the 30-day window already communicated. The valuation stands at $840,000. If you'll sign here, we can make this dignified for everyone." And Diane, who could never resist the sound of her own certainty, leaned in and delivered the line she'd clearly been saving. "It's the family's name, Adaline, it always was. A wife doesn't own what a name built." She smiled, small and sure. "Mr. Okafor, I'd like to introduce you to the man who'll be running Fern Rye going forward. My son, Colton." Colton half rose and put out his hand toward Dev, that business card between his fingers. And Addie reached into the canvas bag by her chair and laid 2 documents on the table. She didn't slide them dramatically. She set them down flat, side by side, and smoothed them once with her palm, the way she smoothed dough. "Before anyone shakes any hands," she said, "somebody at this table should finally read the paperwork." Sutcliffe looked down. His eyes moved across the raised seal. The state stamp. The heading. Articles of Organization, Fern Rye LLC. He went still in a way lawyers don't usually go still. "There's one name on the certificate," Addie said, quiet, even. "It's the one none of you ever bothered to read." The room didn't understand yet. Diane's smile was still on her face, out of pure momentum. "Sole member," Addie said. "Sole manager, Adaline Reyes. Filed 11 years ago, in year 1, when Grant couldn't be bothered to come to the county office with me. There is no Whitlock on this document. There was never a Whitlock on this document. Grant is not a member. Grant is not a manager. He holds no interest, and he never has." She tapped the second page, and this is the operating agreement that says the same thing, signed and dated, certified by the state last month. Then, she let it sit. She let the silence do the work she'd refused to do in the kitchen. Sutcliffe was the first to move, and he moved the way a man does when the ground shifts under his professional feet. He read the articles a second time, then the operating agreement. He picked up the certified seal and turned it toward the light, checking it and finding it exactly what it was. He set his pen down on the table. Deliberately, "Capt. Mrs. Whitlock," he said, and his voice had changed entirely, gone flat and careful. "Did you tell me your family held an ownership interest in this business?" "We," the name, Diane started. "That is not an ownership interest." Sutcliffe closed his folder. He addressed the whole table now, but really he was addressing Dev, because Dev was the witness who mattered, and Sutcliffe knew it. "This filing is authentic and controlling. Miss Reyes is the sole member and sole manager of this LLC. Her ex-husband holds no interest, and neither, therefore, does his family. There is no marital claim to a business the spouse never had an interest in." He stood and buttoned his jacket. "I cannot proceed. I won't proceed. There is no standing here, and I won't put my name on a demand against a company my clients do not own. My office will withdraw its letter today." He looked at Diane, and there was something almost like anger under the ice. "You should have shown me this 11 years ago. You should have known it existed." He gathered his briefcase, and he was the first out the door. Colton hadn't said a word yet. He was still half standing, hands still out, the business card still pinched between 2 fingers, Whitlock Family Holdings, printed and everything. And now he watched the thing he'd promised the whole town crumble in real time, because Dev Okafor turned, slowly, in his chair, away from Colton's outstretched hand, and toward Addie. "So to be clear," Dev said, "the owner, the person I sign a wholesale contract with, is you." "It's me," Addie said. "It's only ever been me." Dev looked at Colton's hand, still hanging in the air, and he did not shake it. He reached into his own bag and pulled out the renewal. The Cascade Market Co-op wholesale agreement, more than half of Fern Rye's revenue, on a single stapled document. He uncapped his own pen. "Then let's settle it today, like you said." He signed. He turned it and set it in front of Addie. Sole member, sole signatory. Same as it always should have been. She signed under his signature, her looping hand steadier than it had been in weeks. Colton lowered his arm. He put the card back in his pocket. He'd told the barber, the hardware store, the whole of Main Street that he'd be running things soon, and he sat now in the room he'd strutted into and watched his restructuring evaporate in front of the one buyer he'd printed the card to impress. He didn't argue. There was nothing left to hold a clipboard over. He just went a dull red and stared at the table and said, very quietly, "The bank thing wasn't a glitch, was it?" "No," Addie said. "It wasn't." Then Diane. Diane's face was the one Addie had waited 11 years to watch. Not because she wanted her to suffer, she was past wanting that, but because she wanted to see the exact moment the woman's certainty ran out of road. It came behind the eyes first. That fast recalibration, the search for a new version of events she could say out loud with the same confidence as the old one. Her mouth opened. She was reaching for it, some sentence where this was still, somehow, the family's doing. "Adaline, surely after everything the family put into, you served me last," Addie said. That was all. She said it without heat. 11 years of Sunday dinners. You served Diane first, then Grant, then Nora, then Colton, then me. Every week. The help eats last. I counted, after a while. It was easier than being angry. She squared the certified pages on the table. You called it Grant's little bakery in front of 40 people. You called me the help. And the whole time, there was one name on the certificate. I filed first. In year 1. While you were deciding I didn't matter, I was already the owner. She looked at her, level. You never read the paperwork, Diane. Not once in 11 years. That's the whole story. Right there. And then she gave Diane nothing more. No second sentence to fight with. She just let the quiet close over the woman like water. And Diane, for the first time in the length of their acquaintance, had absolutely nothing to say. Grant stood up last. He came around the table, and he didn't try to touch her, which was the one decent instinct he had left. I tried to tell her, he said, low, just for Addie. Just now. Before you laid it down. I've been trying to tell her for weeks that I never signed anything, that it was always yours. He rubbed the back of his neck. She wouldn't hear it. She never hears anything that isn't hers. I know, Addie said. And she did know. He wasn't the architect. He was just the man who'd sat quiet while his mother built the thing, the same way he'd sat quiet at every dinner while she was served last. Passive was its own kind of choice. She didn't tell him it was all right. It wasn't all right. She didn't absolve him. She just picked up his family's papers, Sutcliffe's abandoned folder, the demand, the valuation, all of it, and held them out to him. Take these with you, she said. They're not mine. They were never about me. Grant took the folder. He looked at her a moment longer, at the flour on her forearms and the gray coming in at her temples, and the bakehouse she'd made with her own 2 hands out of a home oven and a dead man's rolling pin, and something moved across his face that might have been the first honest grief of the whole affair. Then he left. Before the others, he went out the front door, and the little bell over it rang, the bell she'd hung herself in year 2, and it rang the same for him as it did for every customer who'd ever bought a loaf. The room emptied out slow after that. Diane gathered her scarf with shaking dignity and went without a word. Colton followed, clipboard hanging at his side like a thing he no longer knew how to hold. Dev stayed a minute. He tucked the signed renewal into his bag, and he looked around the bakehouse, the ovens, the trays, the 40 loaves cooling in their racks, and he shook his head slowly. 6 weeks, he said. 6 weeks I sat in board meetings, hearing about the ownership question. And there was never a question. There was never a question, Addie agreed. Your bread really is better than Harrow Street's, he said. And he almost smiled. And he left too. And then it was just Addie and Marisol and Nora and the smell of morning and the racks going quietly tick as they cooled. Marisol came off the wall. She'd had her arms crossed the whole time, holding herself still, and now she crossed the floor and went straight to the bench and picked up the burl-wood rolling pin. The one Colton had shoved onto the flour sack trash pile like clutter weeks ago that she'd fished out and cleaned and set back where it belonged. She carried it over and put it in Addie's hands. You made 40 loaves this morning, Marisol said before all that. The ovens don't care about lawyers, Addie said. Her voice caught, just a little, on the last word. She held her father's rolling pin against her chest with both hands, the way you'd hold something living. And she let herself feel it, finally, the whole weight of 11 years. And then she set it back down on the bench, gentle, where it started every batch. We're still here, she said. Nora was crying quietly against the wall. You're still here. We're still here, Addie said again, and this time it wasn't a question she was answering. It was just true. About a year later, the light comes into Fern Rye the way it always has, slant and gold through the front glass, catching the flour haze so the whole front room looks like something breathing. Dawn, Addie is in by 4, same as 10,000 mornings before. The burl rolling pin is warm in her hands from the work, worn a little smoother even than her father left it, and every batch still starts with it. Because some things you don't change no matter who tried to take them. Out at the dock, the Cascade Co-op trucks are loading, 9 full racks and 14 half sheets going out on the wholesale run, more than half her revenue rolling away on schedule. Contract renewed, signed, clean, one name on it. Dev Okafor sends a note now and then that just says, the bread's still better than Harrow Street's. She keeps those. Nora runs the front counter these days. She left the family table for good and never once looked back, and she's happier than Addie's ever seen her, calling regulars by name, learning the difference between a proof and a bake. The bell she rings 100 times a day is the same bell. Diane is not on the family dinner list anymore. There isn't one, not really, not since it all came apart. And Addie is at peace with that in a way she couldn't have imagined a year ago. She doesn't wish the woman harm. She just doesn't wish her a place at the table. Some quiet accountings settle themselves. Colton's own venture, some holding company, some big plan. Whitlock family holdings on a card he had printed before he checked who owned anything, folded within a few months. Turns out you can't restructure what was never yours. Addie heard about it and felt nothing much at all, which is its own kind of freedom. And Grant sent a short note. Decent, brief, no excuses in it. Just that he was sorry, and that she'd built something good, and that he should have said so out loud years ago. She keeps it in the bottom drawer of the back office desk, in the exact spot where the folder used to live, where the certificate slept for 11 years, while a whole family decided she didn't matter. She figured out the thing that took her far too long to learn. The name on the door was never the name that mattered. The name on the certificate was, and that name was always hers. Adaline Reyes. Sole member. Sole manager. The woman with the burned forearms and the dead man's rolling pin, who was in by 4 every morning while the surname slept. The ovens are hot. The first loaves are coming up gold. And out front the bell rings. And it's just a customer, just the first of the day, buying bread from the woman who made it. Tell me in the comments, who in your life underestimated what you built? I want to hear your name for it. Comment the city you're watching from. I really do want to see how far this one travels. The room does not erupt. That is the first thing worth understanding about what happened next. There is no dramatic shouting, no chair knocked back, no Diane reaching across the table to snatch the documents and tear them. The moment is quieter than that, and quieter moments land harder. Bram Sutcliffe picks up the Articles of Organization first. He is a man who has spent 30 years reading filings, and he knows what he is looking at inside of 15 seconds. His face does not change, not exactly, but something behind it recalibrates. He sets the articles down, picks up the operating agreement, and reads the relevant paragraph twice. Addie counts. She can hear the clock on the conference room wall, the faint hiss of the building's air system, Diane breathing through her nose. Sutcliffe sets his pen down on the table. This detail matters. He had been holding it. Ready, Miss Reyes, he addresses her directly, for the first time in this meeting, which itself tells a story. Is this document certified by the Oregon Secretary of State? The stamp is on the back page, Addie says, along with the date it was filed. 11 years ago. He turns it over. He reads the stamp. He reads the date. Then he does something she will think about later. On quiet mornings, he straightens the documents into a neat stack and slides them back to her side of the table, careful not to leave his fingerprints on more than he already has. He looks at his own client, at Diane, at Colton, and he says plainly, the way a doctor names a diagnosis, the entity has a sole member. That member is Miss Reyes. Neither Mr. Whitlock nor any other party appears as a member or manager, and no assignment of interest has been recorded with the state. He closes his portfolio. I cannot proceed with the transfer on the basis of these documents. The family has no standing in this matter. Colton says, that can't be right. Sutcliffe does not argue with him. He simply does not respond, which is its own answer. Dev Okafor has been sitting at the far end of the table, very still. He is a man who buys on relationships and fulfills on paperwork, and he understands what he just witnessed. The paperwork was never in dispute. It was only in question because one side of the table never looked at it. He turns his chair, slowly, deliberately, the kind of pivot a man makes when he has made a decision, and he faces Addie. I'd like to get the renewal signed today, he says. If you're ready. She is ready. She has been ready since 4 that morning. Dev slides the wholesale contract across to her side of the table, and she signs it with the same pen she always carries, a cheap ballpoint she keeps in the front pocket of the back office apron, the kind her father used to tuck behind his ear in the workshop. The ink goes down clean. Colton watches the pen move across the signature line, and something in his face does a thing she has never quite seen a face do before. Not anger, not embarrassment, but the specific collapse of a man who told a story about himself to everyone he knew and has just run out of room to keep telling it. He says nothing else. He gathers his papers. The ones Sutcliffe brought, the ones the family had printed with the Whitlock name at the top, the ones that were always built on an assumption nobody checked, and he stacks them, and he stands, and he leaves the room before Diane does, which is the first independent thing Addie has ever seen him do. Diane does not move immediately. This is the moment Addie had thought about, in the weeks of quiet preparation, in the slow walks she took along the river path at dusk when Marisol was closing. She had imagined something large, a scene, a pronouncement, a dramatic final exchange that would settle 11 years of small, deliberate erasure. What she gets is smaller and, for that truer, Diane looks at the signed contract. She looks at the articles. She looks at Addie's face, looking for something to argue with, and she does not find it. Addie gives her nothing to grip. No triumph in the eyes, no curl at the mouth, just a woman sitting at her own table, in her own business matter, which has been settled. Addie says, "You served me last for 11 years. I filed first, in year 1. That is all." Diane opens her mouth, closes it, and leaves. The door does not slam. It closes with the soft mechanical click of a conference room door doing its ordinary job. And the ordinary sound of it is somehow the most final thing in the room. Grant is not at the table. He had come as far as the building's lobby and stopped there. She learned this later from Nora, who had found him sitting in a chair by the elevator, his hands on his knees. A man who knew what was in the filing, even if he'd never said so. When Nora went out to tell him it was done, he nodded. He didn't ask how it went. He took the elevator down alone. Back inside, Marisol exhales so audibly that Dev Okafor almost laughs. Almost, he shakes Addie's hand, thanks her for her patience with the delay, the formal, careful phrasing of a man who chose not to name what the delay actually was, and he leaves with the signed contract in his bag and the knowledge that the bread is as good as it has always been. Nora finds her in the hallway outside, says nothing, just squeezes her hand once, the way people do when language would only reduce something. On the way out, Addie passes the credenza by the conference room door. Her father's rolling pin is there, where she set it that morning without thinking about it, the way she sets it down every morning in the bakehouse, the burl wood warm from her grip, the lathe-turned handle worn to the shape of her palm. She picks it up. She carries it out.